Uhuru, you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis and Norman Richmond. And joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne of Houston, the University of Houston. And he has one of his latest books is, dare I say, we talked about it last week. It's a reader, and I'm looking forward to checking it out. And Dr. Gerald Horne, we have a lot to cover. I think last week we were supposed to talk about the Siamese twins, and I was talking to Ilombe Braff's son, and I didn't know that these Siamese twins, they were born in Barbados, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the ones who were the originals, who were born in Siam, Thailand in the 19th century, the beginning of the 19th century, wound up migrating to the United States. Now, for those who are not familiar, Siamese twins, at least, and certainly these original Siamese twins, they're two persons that are joined, oftentimes at the hip, as one person. And they were displayed in carnivals and in circuses, made quite a bit of money by 19th century standards, and then wound up moving to North Carolina, where they became big slave owners. So the reason I'm revisiting this topic, because I have this research project on Southeast Asia, United States and Southeast Asia, and of course that inevitably brought me to the original Siamese twins, who were enslavers. And interestingly, for what it's worth, as you probably know, Thailand has a substantial population of Chinese descent. In fact, that's the case throughout most of Southeast Asia, particularly the Philippines, Vietnam, etc. And oftentimes they are at the top of the socioeconomic pyramid. And so the original Siamese twins were actually of Chinese ancestry. And I'm afraid to say that they were real abusers of their enslaved population. And don't ask me how, but they wound up marrying two sisters and fathering quite a brood. And some of their sons wound up fighting for the Confederacy in the U.S. Civil War. That is to say, fighting to ensure the continuation of enslavement of Africans. So that's something I just wanted to share with the audience, because oftentimes when I share these sorts of tidbits, listeners then email me with further embellishing of what I've just said.
Well, Melinda has been to Thailand, so she might definitely have something to say about that.
Yeah, I do. I went in 2016. I was blessed to have been able to join my friend who needed she wanted to do yoga, and then I went and took care of her son for a bit. She's like, "Do you want to come to Thailand?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm not doing anything right now." So and I loved it. I wish I could have been there and seen, the whole region, right? Like I would have liked to go to Vietnam and Cambodia and stuff. So anyway, yeah, that's my little tidbit on my time in Thailand. Yeah.
Another tidbit that I've uncovered, I'm not sure if I'll be able to follow up on it, is that part of the controversy in Thailand today is that between a former leader, Thaksin Shinawatra, who was a kind of populist billionaire, not along the lines of Donald Trump, by the way, more sort of anti-royalist populist billionaire, because there's a real conflict in Thailand between the royal family, which controls a good deal of the economy and are fabulously wealthy, and a rising capitalist class represented by Thaksin. Now, the reason I bring up Thaksin is that he was eventually driven out of the country and was replaced by a close relative, Yingluck Shinawatra. And I mention her because she has HBCU ties. She attended Kentucky State University, which is a historically Black college. which then tickled my fancy with regard to were there other Southeast Asians at HBCUs beyond her?
The Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Gerald Horne is on the mic, and Melinda Francis is joining me. I guess we wanted definitely to talk, I guess, in detail about the life of Harry George Belafonte, young man with Jamaican and Martinican roots. Could you share with us what were your thoughts on Mr. Belafonte? How do you think history is going to judge Mr. Belafonte from the oppressed people's point of view and from the oppressor's point of view?
Well, Belafonte also happened to have Sephardic Jewish ancestry. There hangs a tale, because if you look at my 16th century book, you'll see that the Sephardic Jewish population plays a major role in those pages. And Sephardic, of course, referring to the Jewish population of the Iberian Peninsula, principally Spain, who in the Hinge year of 1492 were expelled, and helping to create, or I should say, further enhance a Jewish diaspora. And Harry also shared those roots. But I think history will be very kind to Mr. Belafonte because of his association with the left. He oftentimes said that his very career was a continuing homage to the great late Paul Robeson, who, as you know, was the tallest tree in our forest. Both Harry and his friend and friendly rival, Sidney Poitier, who passed away also quite recently, were students of Paul Robeson, studied at his knee. Poitier, of course, having Bahamian and South Florida roots, actually late in his career serving as Bahamas ambassador to Japan, besides being an award-winning actor and director and producer. And Harry, of course, was also a producer and an actor. I can't recall if he was a director. I would recommend to this day a number of his films, including Carmen Jones, including Odds Against Tomorrow, including Kansas City, including Black Men's Burden. Harry was a very talented individual, and of course, a major donor and funder to Dr. King, which was understandably played up in the U.S. press. The connection to Robeson did not get as much attention, but that's understandable given the nature of the politics of this country. But Harry will be sorely missed. He was a estimable descendant of the legacy of the late great Paul Robeson.
Let me say that Harry Belafonte was definitely one of the people that I looked up to. He disappointed me on two occasions. One, when he came out and he criticized Ahmed Secretary. He and Ahmed Secretary had a falling out, and it was possible. He made it. Harry Belafonte made it possible for people like Fannie Lou Hamer to go to Guinea and meet the Secretary, but he subsequently, Mr. Belafonte did not like the way Ahmed Secretary, president of Guinea, treated some of the opposition. And he also, I really had a problem when he put Ray Charles in that film, We Are the World, because we were like really struggling against Ray Charles because he had violated the cultural boycott, had gone to Israel and so on and so forth. And I guess I made history through Ray Charles, because if you look at his statement about myself, he basically called me out by name. He said that you could tell that Norman Richmond and his Black Music Association, that he can osculate the rear end of my posterior, but he didn't put it in those terms. He put it in plain English. Peter Tosh, Nina Simone, Gil Scott Heron style, straight, no chaser.
Speaking of straight, no chaser, I'm very eager to hear a first-hand report about this strike in Canada, which is receiving significant attention. How many workers are out, and what is the political impact?
We're talking about no, go ahead, Melinda. I'm sorry. I'll cut you off.
Yeah. He's talking about the federal strike. The public workers union went on strike this week, and because they're in negotiations. I think the negotiations have been going on for like 2 years or how long these things. So they walked out last week. So, and if people know, like in Canada now, you can't get any status. You can't get any immigration, cases. Like, so all of that, like public service that the federal government does, is on a standstill. Taxes are due, so it's affecting that. So it's all workers. It's one of the biggest unions in Canada are on strike right now. So I guess the government, I think it was either yesterday or today, they put in a final deal. So it's now up to like the members to see if they're going to take the deal, kind of thing. So that's where it's at right now.
Mm-hmm. And I take it that the NDP, the New Democratic Party, is in strict solidarity with the strikers.
You're talking about,
I would hope
the NDP is led by a Sikh comrade by the name of Jagmeet Singh, and I would think I think they are yes. They would have to be if they're not. They would have a lot of masses of Canadian people. I would think that the left is a little bit. I shouldn't say a little bit, but I think you have quite a few people in Canada that are more sympathetic. Like, without giving up too much information, I have a doctor, and when you walk into his office, he has a big bust of a Norman Bethune. I mean, it must be at least 4 feet tall.
Really?
And Norman Bethune was a Canadian. Norman Bethune was a Canadian. He was in the Canadian Communist Party. He was a medical doctor, and he served in China. Yeah, and Mao Zedong has an essay about Norman Bethune. Yeah, but you walk into give him Dr. Latter, Dr. David Latter. You walk into his office, and you'll see as soon as you walk in, it's a huge statue of Norman Bethune. When I saw that, I felt at ease. I knew I was in good hands.
Yeah, Norman Bethune is of world historic significance, as you suggested. Traveled to China during the revolutionary days of the 1930s and after, and is seen in China as a national hero. In fact, if Canada is able to improve its relations with China, which of course have been on the downturn lately, one possible route would be to play the Bethune card to try to get back in the good graces.
I remember, I'll give you a story and then we'll move on to the next topic. I went into a video store when they had the video stores, and there was a Chinese woman in the store, and I walked in, and with my arrogant self, I asked her about Norman Bethune, and she said she never heard of Norman Bethune. He didn't know what I was talking about. So with my arrogant self, I was basically saying, I got one on you, blah, 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 blah. And when I came back the next time, she says, "Oh, Norman Bethune." He called him by his Chinese name and rattled off, gave me about a 10-minute, a whole discussion about Norman Bethune, but she didn't know him by his English, his European name. She called him out, by his Chinese name, his Mandarin name, and I basically she basically shut me up. The only thing I could do was just say, submit, say you were right and I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I guess being born in America really can make you think you know everything.
Mm.
Can we go on to talk about South Africa and the ICC, the International Criminal Court? Now, you have been, since I've known you, since you've been on these airwaves, you've always been a critic of the ICC, because you've maintained that the ICC only goes after African and I think socialist leaders. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, sure. I mean, formerly socialist country leaders, such as the former Yugoslavia no longer exists, certainly not in the form it existed before the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And now they've issued an indictment for President Putin of Russia. And so there was this news account a few days ago that said that South Africa was going to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. It was a signatory to the charter. And this was in the context of pressure being placed on South Africa to arrest Mr. Putin, assuming that he came to Durban for the BRICS meeting in August, BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And so President Ramaphosa made a statement saying that South Africa was withdrawing, and then the party came out with a statement and said that he misspoke. But clearly that's evidentiary of the roiling of the waters caused by the ICC. And actually, I hope that South Africa does withdraw, because if you look at Sudan, for example, which we talked about last week and is currently still in turmoil, the ICC is a major player because, number one, the ICC sought to arrest the former leader, President Bashir. When he came to South Africa a few years ago, they put pressure on the ANC to detain him. They did not. The current conflict in Sudan between a wing of the military, the Rapid Support Forces, and the overall military is partially driven by the fact that the force that loses that conflict will probably be extradited to stand trial, such as what happened to Charles Taylor of Liberia. Recall that then South African President Thabo Mbeki persuaded him to step down from office, and he thought that he had found exile, I believe, in Nigeria, but the ICC wasn't having it. And so he's now behind bars. And when you have an international criminal court that is basically a tool of the imperialists, it is unfortunate, to put it euphemistically. It helps to generate and exacerbate turmoil, as is happening in Sudan. And it also illustrates, as the Liberia case tends to show, that if you do have a manifest human rights abuser in office, there's little incentive to step down, as Charles Taylor did, because obviously Thabo Mbeki could not guarantee him sanctuary. And so it almost serves as an incentive for human rights abusers to stay into office until they leave office horizontally, as opposed to vertically.
Yep. And I wanted to say that there is, speaking of, you're talking about the Sudan, there was a young lady by the name of Islam Ibati. She is a bass player, and she's from the Sudan. She had her own radio show. She's been on Diasporic Music a couple of times. I hope she's safe. But she is a bass player. She has a group called The Now, and they have a rendition of Inner City Blues on. You can go check it out on YouTube. And I hope that she's in Khartoum. I hope she's safe.
Ditto.
You have another question, Melinda?
Yeah. Did we want to go into South Korea?
Well, yeah. So, President Yoon of South Korea, who's a real conservative and a real sellout to the Yankees. You might have seen the clip, although I would not recommend it, of him singing in the White House this classic U.S. rock song, singing it in English. He knew all the lyrics. And of course, people were
Bye American Pie.
Exactly. People were laughing and applauding. But he's now headed back home, and I think the people of South Korea are really going to give him a piece of their mind, because basically he's signing on to the anti-China alliance. And China is South Korea's major trade partner. You can't begin to understand the rise of Kia and Samsung and LG Lucky Gold Star without understanding their relationship to the People's Republic of China. But obviously he's willing to throw all of that away, not only to be a spearhead against China, but a spearhead against the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And at the same time, he's getting closer to Japan, which had a brutal colonial regime between 1910 and 1945. Whenever I say that and mention it, I think of all the animosity that's generated on the Korean Peninsula because of that 35-year colonial rule. And then I think of hundreds of years of Africans being exploited by these Western Europeans, and to a degree, I'm afraid to say, by some in West Asia as well. And I'm looking at the Ottoman Turks, and I'm looking at the appendages of the Ottoman Turks as well. So in any case, he's going to face a very difficult struggle in Seoul, in South Korea, because of his pro-Yankee policies.
Dr. Horne, let me ask you the question. What is the relationship of African people in the United States and Koreans? And where I know the Koreans are like any other people, you have a right, left, and center. But, what is the relationship between the Black community in America and the Korean people and the Korea? There was always a problem, I guess, with the merchants. But how does that look in 2023?
Well, as you know, the problem with Korean and Korean American merchants was a flashpoint in Southern California in 1992 during that particular conflagration. You may recall the killing of the Black teenager Latasha Harlins, which much more so, I would say, than the photographed videotape beating of Black motorist Rodney King by officers of the state and their acquittal by a jury in Simi Valley, California, where, by the way, the Ronald Reagan Library is housed on a majestic hill as we speak. I think that the killing of Latasha Harlins by a shopkeeper of Korean ancestry captured on videotape over a conflict concerning a bottle of orange juice, this did not go down very well, which is an understatement, in Black Los Angeles, and it caused quite a bit of conflict. But I was speaking to some graduate students the other day about the performance, the actions of various immigrants to the United States. And I was saying this in the context of another story we're going to cover. That is to say, Jada Pinkett is in the process of releasing on Netflix a docudrama about Cleopatra. And she got a dark-skinned African-American woman to play Cleopatra, which the authorities in Cairo objected to. They said Cleopatra was not dark-skinned. And I was talking to graduate students because one graduate student in particular was doing a dissertation on a relationship between the Black Americans and the Palestinians. And I pointed out that sadly enough, when many Palestinians arrive on these shores, they accommodate themselves to the status quo, which to a certain extent means accommodating themselves to white supremacy. And I'm afraid to say that's true for a goodly number of those who answer to the title Arab American. And I think it's because of their melanin deficiency. If they're melanin deficient and have a U.S. accent, well, then they wonder what the problem is in North America. It would be as if, Michelle Obama has Black Jewish relatives. And so it would be as if they went to Israel or accepted into the Jewish camp, and they're wondering what the Palestinians are complaining about. Well, that's what some of these Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans are doing to the detriment of their cause. Because if they're going to get support in the U.S. electorate, most likely it'll be from Black Americans. So in a sense, they're sort of selling out their people for contemporary privilege right here in the United States. And I say that because I pointed out as well that one of the few groups who sought to buck the U.S. status quo with regard to white supremacy were Japanese Americans, who perhaps more than any ethnic group coming to these shores, were willing to violate Jim Crow norms and dicta. Now, of course, there's a larger explanation for that. That is to say that Japan's a major capitalist country. And before World War II, they were catering to Black Americans, that is to say Tokyo, as opposed to the Japanese American population. And of course, Japanese Americans and Tokyo paid a heavy price. Japan subjected to atomic bombing, Japanese Americans, particularly in California, having their property taken and then shuttled into internment camps or concentration camps. And in considering the Korean and Korean American population, I oftentimes wondered if their antipathy towards Tokyo had anything to do with their apparent divergence from Japanese Americans who oftentimes sought to buck Jim Crow norms. The explanation provided to me was that as shopkeepers, they oftentimes had cultural clashes with Black American customers for various reasons. Then, of course, you cannot disregard the fact that countless Black American soldiers patrolled the Korean Peninsula. And by the way, for my Panther book, I just read the book by Wallace Terry that came out decades ago called Bloods, about the Black American experience in Vietnam during the war in Indochina. Mm-hmm. I've never read, and I hope never to read, a more illuminating book about Black inhumanity than this story of Black soldiers in Vietnam. What they were doing to these Vietnamese, it shocks the conscience. And it makes me wonder, did Wallace Terry, did he just include in this oral history these shocking stories? Were there other cases that he didn't include? But whatever the case, that book, whew, it's really something.
Wallace Terry, was he from Los Angeles?
I'm not sure.
Was he was in the party, you said?
Oh, he was a journalist. He just
journalist. I'm sorry.
I was reading the book in order to get background for my book. He was actually born in New York City.
Okay. Yeah, because there was a one of Bunchy Carter's comrades he was Terry, but his first name was not Wallace, right? So that's why it got me mixed up. But we only have a few minutes left. Could you talk about the 75th anniversary of Israel and also your thoughts on the NBA?
It's do or die.
Talk about the gender, before you can answer, because I put this in there, your thoughts on the gender fluid Dylan Brooks.
Oh, he's gender fluid. I didn't know that. Is that how he describes himself, or that's how you describe him?
So that's how I'm describing him. He's from comes from Mississauga. He's Canadian.
Oh, I dig. Well, he's gotten a reputation as a villain. You know, he punched LeBron James in the groin, had LeBron sprawled out on the court, called LeBron old, and then the Lakers smoked them out of the series. But in any case, points. Sorry?
By 40 points.
In any case, Israel's marking its 75th anniversary. It's a very dispiriting anniversary. And I think one of the demerits, I'm afraid, of the international communist movement, 1947, 1948, was helping to engineer the creation of that state, and which in many ways overrode the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. And it's not a good look. And you know that in The Nation, the New York-based weekly, I wrote this piece just recently pointing out how Karl Marx himself had little or nothing to say about the Haitian Revolution. And that particular omission, and then drawing a line from that to the communist movement overriding the aspirations of the Palestinians. Now, of course, to be sure, there was supposed to have been a Palestinian state created, but it would not have taken an oracle to figure out that the dynamics were such that it would not come into being. I think that historically speaking, it was foreseeable. And then on top of everything else, reference what I just said about the Palestinian emigres to North America. The bottom line is that it shows that we all have a lot of work to do.
I think we've gone over time, and I would like to thank you, thank Melinda, thank Lisa Watson for her technical brilliance per usual. And I guess we will